Welcome friends for our India's knowledge series video number 28. Today we will be discussing a simple standard India's 104. India's 104 talks about insurance contracts. If you ask me whether this India's 104 is a full-fledged accounting standard for all insurance company to follow, the answer I have to give is in the negative. In simple terms, the International Accounting Standard Board is in the preparation of an insurance contract for more than 2 years, and during that period, there is an interim standard which has been given, that is what IFRS 4. We have also adopted IFRS 4 as Ind AS 104. However, International Accounting Standard Board actually returned a full-fledged standard for insurance. It is called IFRS 17. After leases, IFRS 17 on insurance, they have written a full-fledged standard, and to that extent, those standards are internationally applicable from accounting period commencing on or after 1st January 2021. That means another 6 months is what is the period for which the insurance, full-fledged insurance contract related standard IFRS 17 will be implemented globally. But in India, what has happened was the roadmap for insurance companies have been postponed indefinitely on the assumption that if an interim standard like Ind AS 104 has been applied, and later on a full-fledged standard has to be transitioned within another 1 year, it will be too much of hardship on all insurance companies, and accordingly they have said it is preferable that we will adopt once the full-fledged standard has been made effective in India. The particular standard IFRS 17 is in the process of being notified as Ind AS 117, and after that the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority IRDA may be implementing the timeline within which Ind AS should be applied by insurance companies. So you are aware that as of now the Ind AS implementation for banking companies as well as the insurance companies have been deferred without any specific timeline. Maybe after Ind AS 117 has been notified, there is a possibility of insurance companies adopting that particular standard. Up to this period, Ind AS 104 is only an interim standard, and to that extent, it does not have any impact on any other company. That is another reason why I believe that this particular standard, as of now, we have to consider as a temporary standard as part of our Ind AS knowledge series video number 28. Before I go and discuss about this particular interim standard, let me once again request all of you to post your questions, inputs and queries in our YouTube channel, so that when I answer a particular question, all the subscribers will also get the same benefit. Okay, with that, let's move on to this standard. Let's look into the structure of the entire discussion on Ind AS 104. Basically, we would like to see what is scoped in and what is scoped out of this particular standard. And what are all the key definitions relating to this? For example, what is an insurance contract? What is an insurance risk? All those things we will see as part of the discussion. Insurance risk, and we will also see one of the important aspect. Some of the insurance contract may be deposit linked insurance scheme. There will be a deposit, and it also covers some sort of insurance risk. So to that extent, you have to split the deposit components from the insurance contract, and the deposit component has to be accounted as per Ind AS 109, and the insurance contract will be accounted as per Ind AS 104. So the unbundling of deposit components, we have to look into how that is being done. What is the recognition and measurement principles which are given in Ind AS 104 is another area of discussion which we are going to see. There are some areas, there are specific guidances given. For example, it says whether the liability towards your insurance claims, that is your obligation to settle your insurance claim, there is an adequate provision made in the books of accounts. They call it as liability adequacy test. If it is not there, what to be done? That is part of the standard. Similarly, there are some guidances for change in accounting policy, especially Ind AS 8 is saying that if there is no specific standard which prescribes the accounting principles with respect to a specific accounting treatment, para 10 to 12 of Ind AS 8 is actually giving certain hierarchy in which you can select a new set of accounting standard which is not available in Ind AS. So there are some guidances which specifically says that an insurance company which is following in Ind AS 104 will also get some sort of exemption from out of paragraph 10 to 12 of Ind AS 8. We will discuss that as well. There is a concept called shadow accounting. We will see that shadow accounting as well. That is also a special guidance available. And finally, we go into what is the disclosure we are supposed to give with respect to insurance contract as per Ind AS 104. This is going to be our main coverage. Some of the smaller elements are bundled in between these slides. First of all, what is the objective of this standard? As I have mentioned, it is talking about what is the financial reporting framework insurance companies has to follow. Having said that, as of now, Ind AS has not been notified for insurance companies. It has been deferred without any specific timeline. And when this specific standard, that is the insurance standard, Ind AS 117, being notified, there should be some sort of guidance available for how the accounting for insurance contract should be there. That is the reason why 104 has been brought in, which is a limited improvements with respect to accounting by the insurers in respect of the insurance contract. Having said that, this contract is only talking about how the insurance companies will account for it and not the insuree. That is not the person who has insured, who has taken a policy. Accounting principles are not covered by Ind AS 104. In fact, it says that what are all the disclosure arising out of the application of Ind AS 104, that should be part of the objective. In fact, when you are talking about the disclosure, majority of the disclosure helps to understand what is the timing, and the amount, and what is the uncertainty relating to future cash outflows from an insurance contract. You are aware that a claim will be settled only if there is an insurance event which has happened. That means whatever insurance risk which has been covered, if it's triggered, for example, there is a fire insurance and fire has occurred, then there is an obligation arises. But having said that, I cannot postpone recognition of the liability only on claim. Then it becomes a accounting based on the actual obligation which arises. Whereas, like the moment I have entered into an insurance contract, I have an obligation to settle at any time, but I am not sure about what is the timing and which it will happen. What is the quantum which will happen? So to understand that, the insurance contract says that you should always estimate and make a provision for your estimated liability, and that is what we are saying. The liability adequacy test should be applied, and if there is a shortfall, that should be provided for. So to understand the amount which will be settled as an insurance claim, what is the timing at which it will be settled, and what is the uncertainty relating to the future cash outflow, all those things are going to be very easily understandable for the purposes of the users of the financial statement if the related disclosures are available. That is the objective of this standard. As I have said, Ind AS 104 is a temporary standard until a complete standard on insurance is prepared and notified, and Ind AS 117 will be taking that particular situation. What is scoped in? As we have said, insurance contract as well as reinsurance contract. Reinsurance contract is what? An insurance company, instead of taking the 100% risk of the insurance event, maybe trying to find out if another third party is ready to take a portion of the insurance risk. If the third party is available, it enters into a contract with the third party, and the third party says, in the case of the insurance risk happens, I will indemnify you, or I will settle your claims to this extent. There is a contract which is entered into. So I'm an insurance company, I am issuing an insurance contract for indemnifying or reducing my insurance risk. I'm entering into a contract with another third party who is maybe also an insurance company. That reinsurance contract is also covered as part of this particular standard. So similarly, there is a possibility that I'm not directly giving an insurance contract. A third party is asking me to give a reinsurance. That contract is also covered. One, my insurance contract, and reinsurance which I have agreed in respect of a third party. Similarly, what is the reinsurance a third party has agreed in respect of that? That is what it says, insurance contract including reinsurance contract that it issues whatever I have issued. Similarly, what is the reinsurance contract which I hold maybe as an asset, right? Because there is a claim which is possible. So both are part of this particular standard. And it also says, if there are some financial instruments which I have issued with a discretionary participation feature, we will see what is discretionary participation feature. Actually, it allows them to get a share of the profits, share of the income which they have earned. That is what discretionary participation feature. But the share of the profits or share of the residual value will be paid by the insurance company on its own discretion. So if there are any financial instrument which has the discretionary participation feature, how to account for that is also part of Ind AS 104. We will see that in some other slide at a later point of time. What is scoped out? There are a lot of things which may be as if like I am indemnifying a particular risk if it happens at a later point of time. Whether that will be considered as an insurance contract as per Ind AS 104. For example, it says that financial assets and liabilities which I am holding. So when I am holding a financial asset and financial liability, the fair value changes moves up and down. Whether that particular loss is an insurance loss and whether that I have to consider as part of my insurance contract, no, it is excluded because Ind AS 109 specifically covers that. I am a manufacturer. I am giving a product warranty. Within 1 year, if anything happens, I will replace that particular part or I will repair that particular part. It is also an indemnification which I am giving to my customers. When the product warranty has been directly issued by the manufacturer, that is part of its obligation to sell, right? Part of its obligation relating to sale. So to that extent, that product warranty is also excluded from the scope of this, goes to Ind AS 115, read with Ind AS 37, provisions, contingent liability and contingent asset. How you have to make a provision towards that. Similarly, I have an obligation to settle defined benefit plans. There is a risk attached to that because it is not stopped with the contribution which I have made. It goes beyond that. Okay, when it goes beyond that, I have an obligation to settle, and I do not know what is the timing. What is the timing of that particular insurance contract which will happen, and what is exactly is my additional liability which I have to incur. Both are part of Ind AS 19 employee benefit and not as part of this particular insurance contract. Contractual rights and obligations that are contingent on future use of a non-financial asset. So anything which is contingent in nature is covered by Ind AS 37 and accordingly it is not covered here. Financial guarantee, because financial guarantee is covered as per Ind AS 109 financial instrument. Accordingly, that is not covered. And contingent consideration receivable or payable in a business combination. Ind AS 103, we have already discussed this. If you still have a doubt on what is contingent consideration, please go back and see our video on Ind AS 103 business combination. If it is a business combination and it is a contingent consideration receivable or payable in a business combination, 103 covers that and 104 excludes it. Direct insurance contract that the entity holds as a policy holder. As I have told already, only for an insurance company it is applicable. If I am a policy holder, it is not applicable to me. For me, as a policy holder, I paid the premium and that I charge it as an expenditure in the period in which it relates. When there is an insurance claim which comes in, at the time I assess whether a related asset has to be recognized. When the conditions to receivable is certain, then I normally account for it. That is actually coming as part of a direct insurance contract where a policy holder holds it. So accordingly, that is also not part of it. It goes to Ind AS 37 as a contingent asset till such time it is receivable. Lessee's residual value guarantee embedded in a finance lease. That is another interesting point. Ind AS 116 says that when I am taking into consideration a financial lease, the lessee has given a guarantee that this is the value at which I will take over the residual value. So that guarantee, whatever guarantee which I am having, which is embedded as part of the finance lease, is covered by Ind AS 116 and to that extent is not part of this particular standard. Okay. Now, we have seen what is scoped in and what is scoped out. Let us understand what you mean by an insurance contract. Because insurance contract, reinsurance contract, as well as reinsurance contract held by the entity is covered by this particular standard, right? So the basic principle, what is an insurance contract? This is the definition given in the standard. An insurance contract is a contract under which one party, that is an insurer, the company which is issuing the policy, accepts significant insurance risk from another party. Who is the other party who is contracting? Will be the policy holder. By agreeing to compensate the policy holder if a specified uncertain future event. What could be the uncertain future event? What is the purpose for which the insurance has happened? What is the insured event? For example, if it is a fire insurance, the occurrence of fire is the insured event. If I am talking about a flood insurance, then occurrence of a flood is an insurance. In a transit, I am talking about a damage causing in relation to a transit of goods will be covered as part of the standard. Otherwise, it is not part of the standard. So it should adversely, that in future event, which is an insured event, should adversely affect the policyholder. And accordingly, whatever policyholder adversely affected, the insurance company accepts to indemnify that particular risk for which both the parties are entering into a contract. That is called as an insurance contract. Arising out of it, what is the key points? As we use the method of following, what is the key points which we have to consider? The first point is there should be an insurer who is issuing an insurance contract. In that contract, there is an agreement to accept significant insurance risk, right, of another party who is a policy holder, and the policy holder should be adversely affected because of the insured event happening, right? So insurers should be there. There is an insurance contract that is to govern an insurance risk in case an insurance event has happened, and because of the insurance event, the policy holder might have been adversely affected. Suppose if the policy holder is not affected, anything relating to that, even if all the elements are there, it is not applicable. If there is no contract of insurance, it is not an insurance contract covered under 104. If there is no insurance risk at all, then that is also not covered. In simple terms, the policy says all these conditions should be prevalent. There should be an insurance, there should be an insurance contract, which is talking about a specific insurance risk, and that insurance risk will be uncertain unless a future event will happen, which is called an insurance event. And because of the insurance event, the policyholder should be adversely affected. In that case, it is called an insurance contract. Let us see what do you mean by insurance risk, because we are saying no, there is a triggering event with respect to an insurance risk. What is that insurance risk? When we are talking about the insurance risk, there is an uncertainty which is the essence of an insurance contract. There is a risk, but whether the risk will happen or not happen will not happen. We are not sure. Many of us might have seen cases where the entity has taken an insurance policy, insurance contract has been entered into, but the insurance risk never happened. Because of that, the risk is actually not triggered. But we are continuing to renew the policy because we are worried about the uncertainty of the timing where the risk will trigger. And accordingly, at least one of the following should be uncertain at the inception of an insurance contract. At least one, right? In the previous one, we have talked about 5 elements, whereas here we are talking about at least one thing should happen at the inception of an insurance contract. That means at the beginning of the contract, where policyholder and the insurer has signed this contract. Whether an insurance event will happen should be an uncertainty, right? If you say definitely this will happen on so and so date, there is an obligation automatically. There is no risk, uncertainty, or risk is there. Okay. Whether an insurance event will occur itself is an uncertainty. When the insurance event will occur, that is also uncertain. Within the current year or next year, we don't know. For example, I am trying to give an indemnity in respect of I am purchasing a product from the manufacturer, but a third party insurance company is ready to give an insurance. For example, when you buy a phone, you are taking an insurance for loss of the phone by theft, right? So somebody else is saying, similarly, nowadays with the costly smartphones, the cost of replacement of your components is also covered, right? So normally the warranty should be given by the manufacturer, but a third party is giving that indemnification. So that when it is going to occur, we don't know, right? But what will happen? Someday or other, the part has to be replaced, right? That we know. So the first condition may not be there, but the second condition, when that replacement will happen, when the triggering event will happen, we are not sure about it. There is an uncertainty or risk relating to that. Or how much is the amount required to pay in case if the triggering event has happened or the insurance event has happened. In the first year, the amount of settlement will be much higher. If it happens in the third year of the insurance, replacement cost will be lower, right? But I'm not sure whether it will happen in the first year or second year or third year. It's completely uncertain. So any one of these items will be uncertain at the inception of an insurance contract. That is called an insurance risk, right? Why we are considering the insurance risk? Let us understand before that. We talked about, right, a financial instrument which also contains a discretionary participation feature. And I said that we will discuss that at a later point of time. What do you mean by discretionary participation feature? A contractual right to receive additional benefit as a supplement to the guaranteed benefit. Sometimes you have this, right? What they will say is that even in some insurance contract you might have seen that they will say you will get a guaranteed benefit of so much, and in the event of the particular insurance investment, whatever I have made as an investment out of the premium, if it is doing very well, a portion of the profit can also be shared. That is what some of the policies which are saying that you will get a maximization of your profits. So if you are taking this type of insurance contract, etc., that type of contractual right to receive additional benefit as a supplement to the guaranteed benefit by the policy holder. The right is for the policy holder. What the benefits could be? Likely as a consequential portion of the total contractual benefit. So I made a benefit out of that. I am paying a portion of the contract to you. I mean benefit to you. Or sometimes the amount and timing is at the discretion of the issuer. Whatever benefit which I am giving, we will see the benefit, the examples of benefit little later. Any benefit which I am going to give as a consequential portion of the total contractual benefit, but the amount and the timing is full at the discretion of the issuer. That is the reason why we are saying discretionary participation feature, right? The third, the benefits are contractually based on what? This is what I'm trying to give. What could be the additional benefit which you'll be doing? Based on the performance of a specific pool of the contract or specific type of the contract. For example, specific pool of the contract, I can say that maybe Jivan Shati or any other Jivan Anand type of specific pool of contract or specific type of contract, life insurance, medical insurance, or you can talk about even the general insurance. That type of special type, a specific type of contract, what is the performance of that particular pool? If there is a profit arising out of that, a share of the benefit is contractually being given in addition to your guaranteed benefit in case of a claim. Second could be these amounts are invested in some investments and there is a return arising out of that in the specific pool of those investment assets held by the issuer, whether it is realized or unrealized. On that I am agreeing to give a portion. This is what I have seen in majority of the cases where they are saying we will invest a portion of your premium in stock market, in debt instrument, and wherever there is an increase happening on the share price or the fair value, we will also share a portion of that to you in addition to your guaranteed benefit. So whether it is realized or unrealized, at each period of time, I will arrive at what is the net asset value, and that will be added as part of your incentive or any other share, right? That could be the second possibility based on the performance of the investment which I have made for a particular pool of asset. Or maybe the entire profit made by the insurance company or the fund or any other entity which has issued the insurance contract. Very rare circumstances, but there are possibilities that you are entitled to share 1% of that for this particular pool of contract. That 1% will be allocated to all the policyholders. If this type of additional benefits are integrated with the contractual right to receive, right, of the guaranteed benefit, but payment of these items are solely under the discretion of the insurer, that is the insurance company, then it is called a discretionary participation feature. Okay, let us understand whether these points, these items are insurance contract, because we always take this type of checkpoints to understand, right? Product warranties issued by the manufacturer of product or its dealers or stockist. If you remember what I have initially talked about, items such as which are scoped out, one of the items which we were talking about is that if the manufacturer give a warranty or guarantee for the product performance and replacement of its parts in case of defectiveness, that is a warranty claim that is covered by Ind AS 115 and not insurance contract 104. But at the same time, I never talked about its dealers and stockists. Normally what happens is when I am the manufacturer, I will issue the warranty along with the product to my dealer, and the dealer in turn will give the warranty to the purchaser, or maybe the dealer will give additional warranty. For example, when I buy a car, the car manufacturer gives some certain warranties. The dealer gives additional warranty, for example, comprehensive maintenance free of cost for 1 year. That are what it has to be considered, whether it is part of the product, insurance contract, or it should be considered separately. It says if it is a product warranty which is issued by the manufacturer or its dealers or its stockist, it is outside the purview of Ind AS 104. There is no insurance contract element involved. That this is based on your performance obligation. That performance obligation has to be measured as per Ind AS 115, revenue from contract with the customers, and not as per Ind AS 104. Suppose if there is a company which is doing a maintenance activity for the products which is manufactured by others or distributed by others, or in that scenario for a fixed fee, whether that is part of insurance contract, it says yes, it is an insurance contract. When a third party is actually ready to indemnify in case of the triggering event, insurance risk, if a policy has been issued for a fixed fee, that is an insurance contract. Whereas the product warranty issued by the manufacturer or its stockist or dealers are not Ind AS 104. It is covered under Ind AS 115. Suppose if the contract says specific payments will be reimbursed to the holder for a loss it incurs because a specific debtor fails to make payment when due under original or modified terms of a debt instrument. For example, credit guarantee insurance which is being given. When I export, I take a insurance contract. In case if the customer is not paying, the foreign buyer is not paying, Export Guarantee Corporation is ready to pay. Whether that is an insurance contract, surely it is an insurance contract. Gaming, betting. For example, I'm just doing a gambling. Now you are talking about no online rummy, online MPL, etc. All those are gaming and betting contracts, and they are not an insurance contract because there is no insurance event. There is no triggering event. What is happening was as a gaming. Similarly, a weathering contract is also considered as a betting contract, and to that extent not covered as per Ind AS 104 as an insurance contract. Now we said no, there could be something called deposit linked insurance plans, and how I have to unbundle the deposit component, how it should be accounted for. Another guidance comes here. It is permitted, unbundling is permitted, but not required. That means it's not mandatory that you have to unbundle the deposit component. That is the reason why the deposit linked insurance schemes are normally accounted as a single contract by the insurance companies so far. Unbundling is permitted but not required if, what is the conditions? Insurance can measure the deposit components separately. Only if it is possible, I can split that, right? It's like a split accounting. If I'm not able to measure the deposit component, where is the question of I'm unbundling that? So it is possible only if the component can be measured separately. The accounting policy recognizes all obligations and rights arising out of the deposit component. What could be the obligation? Could be, for example, there is an interest payment or incentive payment which is coming part of that. That how to recognize that? The accounting policy of the insurance company has been already dealt with that. If both the conditions are satisfied, unbundling of deposit component is permitted, but it's not mandatory, it is not required. What happens? Suppose if that's what it goes without saying. In case if I am not able to unbundle the deposit component, it's prohibited from doing unbundling. Okay. So what we will do with that? When we are unbundling the contract, the insurer shall apply Ind AS 104 for the insurance portion and 109 relating to the deposit component, because the deposit will be refunded along with the interest and other incentives which is required. But at the same time, the deposit linked insurance also covers a risk. For example, there is a life of the deposit holder is also covered. That portion of the insurance risk, that is a insurance on the life of the the policy holder, will be split and recognized as per Ind AS 104, and the deposit component will be a financial liability which will be accounted as per 109 along with other related obligation. Now you are clear. It's nothing but in days 32 we said no. We will split the compound financial instrument and account as per uh, equity or financial liability. Here the main contract is an insurance contract. There is an embedded deposit instrument into that. The host contract and the embedded uh, derivatives are split. Embedded component is split. One is an insurance contract, so you apply Ind AS 104. Another is a deposit component, which is a financial liability, apply Ind AS 109. Very simple principle. That's the reason why this unbundling is being discussed as part of a special guidance. But at the same time, the standard says even it is a policy choice, accounting policy choice. You can decide not to even apply unbundling. The entire thing can be considered as a single insurance contract as per Ind AS 104. That is also permitted. That's what this standard says. The reason why that type of options are retained is because it's a temporary standard. Another interesting factor is that there is a temporary exemption which has been given from application of other Ind AS. For example, if you see Ind AS 8, which is talking about how to recognize a change in accounting policy on a retrospective basis, it allows how the accounting policy should be selected. One. It also says that the accounting policy, when it can be changed. The two elements are covered by Ind AS 8 regarding accounting policy. Apart from that, it also covers change in accounting estimate and accounting errors, how to deal with the accounting errors. In respect of the accounting policy, one of the important element which is covered in Ind AS 8 in para 10 to para 12 of Ind AS 8 is that suppose if I have a particular accounting policy or particular item of asset or liability to be recognized, but I do not have an equivalent Ind AS available for it. For example, for insurance, if you are removing Ind AS 104, there is no specific contract which is available. And Ind AS 104 also we are saying it is only an interim standard or a temporary standard, but it is not a full-fledged standard. Suppose any element relating to an insurance contract for which there is no Ind AS which is applicable, the moment I say that, para 10 to 12 says what is the hierarchy in which you have to apply the principles to find out what should be your accounting policy. One, it says what is said in the financial reporting framework and what is a related, or maybe I should not use the word related, or identical Ind AS which will be available for a similar item. Maybe if I'm saying asset, property, plant, equipment. Similar to property, plant, equipment, if something is happening in my insurance contract, whether I can apply the principles of Ind AS 16, or maybe when I'm saying it seems to be a financial asset under the insurance contract, can I apply Ind AS 109? So normally what you will see is you will first find out whether any similar accounting principles are either mentioned in another Ind AS or in the framework for Ind AS reporting. Suppose both are not there. Next it says go to international accounting standard. What is prescribed there? Suppose international accounting standard is also not there. Find out whether any other accounting literature available by any other standard setters, for example US GAAP or UK GAAP, if there is any other standard setters who are talking about that particular situation. Suppose that is also not there. What is the business principle or business practice based on which the entity has to decide on the basis of the hierarchy what should be the accounting policy? This is a normal situation where for a particular asset or liability or income or expenditure, there is no guidance or specific Ind AS applicable, then you follow this particular hierarchy. This is a mandatory requirement. Interestingly, what has happened was in Ind AS 104, they have given the exemption from this particular para 10 to 12. That is the hierarchy of developing an accounting policy has been given an exemption. When I'm saying it's an exemption, meaning you can apply if you want. If you don't want it, you can use it. In respect of if you don't want to use it, you can do whatever you are already following. So because we are saying no, it's a temporary accounting policy. As an insurance company, I'm already doing certain accounting principle. Without changing the accounting principle based on the hierarchy for certain items of income, expenditure, or asset or liability, where there is no identical standard or specific standard, all other hierarchy is also not available. The entity is allowed to use the existing accounting treatment which is following as per the previous GAAP. No change is required. Otherwise, you can go and use this hierarchy. You have been given the exemption from applying. That means it's only an exemption which I can use it or not use it. So that is what one of the things. On what this insurance, I mean this exemption of para 10 to 12 can be applied, it says in respect of insurance contract that it has issued, whatever policy which it has issued, as well as reinsurance contract it holds. That means whatever insurance policy I have issued, to reduce the insurance risk, I am asking somebody else to be part of it, and they are issuing a reinsurance contract to me. In one case, it's an obligation, and another case, it's an asset. This will offset my overall risk, right? So the reinsurance contract which I am holding, for that also I can use this exemption, as well as the insurance contract I have issued also I can use this exemption. This is another guidance which has been given here. What exactly is the recognition and measurement principle? What it says is that when you have a possible claim which may happen, right, in respect of policies which has been already in existence. So what you are supposed to do, if there are contracts which has been entered into, insurance contract which has been entered into, when there will be a possible claim, so for that I have to make a provision. Whereas if the contract itself is not in existence as on the reporting date, the principle says you should not anticipate and provide, saying that I am going to issue so and so policy, and what is the probable claim which may come, because you have never entered into a contract. There is no, because of that you are not exposed to any insurance risk, right? And accordingly you should not make any provision in respect of contracts which are not in existence at the reporting date. Second recognition and measurement principle says that you should always carry out a liability adequacy test in respect of the contracts which you are already having. What could be the possible claims which will happen, and estimate at every reporting period, and find out whether the provision estimated before, I mean existing provision in the financial statement, is adequate with the assessment made based on the liability adequacy test. What is the revised estimate? Whether it is adequate. If it is adequate, I need not make any further provision. If it is not adequate, I am supposed to make additional provision with a direct debit to the P&L account. That's what the liability adequacy test it's talking about. When that particular insurance liability or part of it has been settled or extinguished, one could be I might have settled it, because of that the policy, insurance policy has become extinguished, or the policy is not continued by the particular insurance holder. That means there is a default. Because of that the policy has automatically cancelled, and whatever insurance liability which I have estimated and recognized in respect of that particular item, I have to remove it from my balance sheet, and only if it is extinguished, right? So if that type of thing is not happening, I estimate that certain policies will automatically extinguish at a future period of time, so I anticipate and remove it. So that is not permitted. I can remove the insurance liability only if it is extinguished from the balance sheet. And interestingly, impairment test is also coming here. Very simple logic. Wherever there is an asset, you have to always see whether the carrying amount is equivalent to the recoverable amount. We are doing every asset. Now, if you are testing your common sense, inventory we are testing by NRV, we are providing an expected credit loss in respect of receivables, we are making impairment test for property, plant and equipment, intangibles under development, goodwill, etc. And we are also making an impairment assessment with respect to your financial assets as well. So all these items, investment property, everywhere we are doing that impairment test one way or other, right? So similarly, even for deferred tax asset, if there is no future possibility of taxable profits, we are reversing that as not recoverable, right? So similarly, an impairment test should also be done in respect of reinsurance asset, meaning what? I have a policy which has been issued to a third party, and to minimize my insurance risk, I am entering into a contract with the third party who is ready to counter guarantee me in case if there is an insurance claim on me. Somebody is ready to take, say, for example, 50% or 80% or 20% of that based on the reinsurance contract. That reinsurance is an asset to me. If I have recognized any asset in respect of reinsurance contract, because I will definitely recognize, because on one hand, for any insurance risk, I am making a provision. Similarly, for that back to back, I have a reinsurance contract. I am entitled to receive a claim, right? So I have to estimate the possibility of receiving that claim. If it is receivable, I also recognize that asset. That asset is nothing but the reinsurance asset. But whether the possibility of which I have assessed in the previous period still holds good, I have to do it. And if there is a issue which is coming in, I have to do an impairment test in respect of that particular item. Interestingly, I can do a recognition of the additional provision except where the contracts are not in existence. I can remove an insurance liability if it is extinguished. I have to carry out a liability adequacy test and additional provision should be made. I should make an impairment test for my reinsurance asset. All those things I have recognized and measured. After that, I have an insurance obligation, liability, and reinsurance asset. Can I offset this? Because it's a back-to-back guarantee, right? Can I offset this and show as a net figure? Again, guidance comes in. Insurer is prohibited from offsetting the reinsurance asset against the related insurance liability. So reinsurance asset should be shown separately. The obligation towards the insurance liability should be shown separately. So, similarly, the expenditure on settlement of an insurance contract and the income which is arising out of reinsurance contract cannot be netted off in the P&L account. So I should not net off and show even if there is a reinsurance, right? That is what asset should not be, obligation should not be netted off with the reinsurance amount which is receivable. Similarly, the related income should not be netted off against my expenditure charged to the P&L account. That is the recognition and measurement principle. What is liability adequacy test? At every reporting period, I have to estimate whether the insurance liability which I am holding in my financial statement is adequate. How I have to do? I have to do a current estimate of the future cash flows based on, normally we do it an actuarial valuation. What could be the possibility of a claim comes in based on so many parameters like an actuarial valuation. Lot of assumptions will be taken over. On that basis, I will test whether the current estimate is equivalent to the provision I am having or there is a shortfall in the provision. If there is a shortfall, I have to recognize that particular additional liability. What is the minimum requirement for the test? Current estimate of all contractual cash flows, both inflows as well as outflows, plus what is arising out of some embedded options, guarantees. For example, I have talked about deposit linked plan, right? What will be the cash outflows which is going to happen in respect of the deposit which is linked as part of that? And I have agreed for a discretionary option to share certain benefit in addition to the guaranteed benefit. What is the cash outflow into that? That should also be factored when you are making the estimate of liability adequacy. Similarly, after doing this analysis, if the test shows that the liability is inadequate, the entire deficiency must be debited to the P&L account with a corresponding credit to the liability. Naturally, when I make a provision for even a normal provision which I am making, every reporting period, I reassess the provision whether it is adequate or not adequate. There is a possibility that the provision may be excessive provision, I reverse the excess provision. Provision may be short, I make additional provision. And that is being followed at every reporting period. Exactly, that is what we call it as a liability adequacy test. Only thing is, this liability is relating to the possibility of an outflow in respect of an insured event happening, for which there is an insurance contract which agree to indemnify the policyholder in case of an insurance risk. Very simple. Normal provision, normal expenditure. Insurance contract, it's a insurance liability adequacy test. Don't confuse yourself. Principle remaining the same. Now, what is the changes in accounting policy? What it says is that changes in accounting policy is permitted only as a result of more relevant presentation is possible. Okay, what it actually uses, the present information that is more relevant and no less reliable, or more reliable and no less relevant. In simple terms, there is one positive and one negative statement is there. To put it out, if you believe that the present financial statement is actually not giving the relevant information and reliable information, or either one of that is missing, you wanted to change the accounting policy so that the user will get the more relevant and more reliable information, then only you can change an accounting policy. What is this? In Ind AS 8, there is one more additional condition is there. If a new accounting standard has been issued, for which you have to change your accounting policy. If you see, for insurance contract, there is no new accounting policy except Ind AS 117, which is going to come. For majority of the items, they are already following certain principle as per existing GAAP. Those accounting policies need not be changed based on a change in any other accounting standard not relevant to insurance. Only if you believe that it will be more relevant and reliable information, you can change your accounting policy. Otherwise, you cannot change your accounting policy. You have to continue with your existing accounting policies, which you are following as per existing GAAP. For example, all insurance companies are following IRDA guidelines, and they are following the accounting standards issued by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. You will continue to account for that, along with the guidance note for how the insurance companies has to account for, maybe for life insurance, what is the guidance, for general insurance, what is the guidance. That should be the basis for having your accounting policy as per existing GAAP. You will continue to follow that GAAP. You will change the accounting policy only if you believe that there is a change which is making it more relevant and reliable information being presented to the users of the financial statement. Otherwise, you are not permitted to change the accounting policy. For example, you cannot say, I will introduce this as a policy, how I will measure the insurance policy, because more reliable and relevant information, I can add anything as a policy, because I have been allowed to go. There is no equivalent standard. You can go to a framework, you can go to the identical standard, IASB, you can go to other accounting standards, business practices. So in case if they are saying no guidance is available, so my insurance liability, what is to be settled in the future event, will be done on an undiscounted basis. When you are saying that, goes fundamentally against my principle, right? Time value of money is not considered. So it is saying that undiscounted basis, you cannot measure your insurance liability by saying that I am changing my accounting policy for relevant and reliable information. What is the future management fees which I will get, which is in excess of the fair value in comparison to the market-based fees for the similar services? You cannot simply say that I estimate my services at a higher than the market price, and to that extent I will recognize that as an income, for which I am changing my accounting policy. Not possible. You have to actually look into that particular aspect. Similarly, you cannot say whatever policy I follow and whatever my subsidiaries are following may be different accounting policy, and I will allow that. I will allow the subsidiary to have a different accounting policy. Not possible, because when you prepare a consolidated financial statement, uniform accounting policy should be there. When an entity wanted to change, that is, the insurance company wanted to change its accounting policy based on relevant information or reliable information will be presented. If I change the accounting policy, these three items are not permitted to be as part of that particular concept of relevant and reliable presentation, specifically prohibited. What do you mean by shadow accounting? When I'm saying the realized gains and losses of an insurance asset have a different effect on the measurement or all of its insurance liability, related deferred acquisition cost, related intangible asset. So I am permitted but not required to change any accounting policy so that a recognized but unrealized gain or loss of an asset affects the measurement the way in which realized gain and losses does. So in simple terms, I can put it that I cannot change an accounting policy just for the purposes of recognizing uh, an unrealized gains and losses of an asset which is arising out of my insurance contract. Realized gains and losses which has a direct effect of that. In respect of this, I can do the adjustment on insurance liability acquisition cost. For example, I pay a commission for acquiring the insurance business. Any intangible assets or rights which I am getting it, all those things will be factored for shadow accounting. But I am permitted but not mandatorily follow recognition of an unrealized gain or losses relating to an asset. That is part of it. Related adjustment depending upon, that is, whenever there is a liability which is getting reduced, it should be recognized in OCI if the unrealized gains and losses is also recognized in OCI. Okay, so in simple terms, whatever liability is not shown as a separate liability, any adjustment to the liability will also be shown as part of the OCI. Goes without saying. In case if I have acquired any insurance contract in a business combination, I have to fair value the insurance liability as well as insurance asset, reinsurance asset which has been acquired, and I'm permitted to split the fair value of the acquired contract into two components. One, liability measured as per the policy of the insurer, and intangible asset which is the difference. There could be an possible intangible asset which is a difference between fair value of the contractual rights acquired and obligation assumed with respect to the insurance contract minus the liability measured as per insurance policy for contract. So we are saying no, measure fair value of insurance contract and insurance asset acquired, but normally the liability is permitted to be measured based on the liability of, accounting policy of the insurer as per the existing gap. And in case if the fair value of the contractual rights acquired and obligation assumed is higher than or lower than the liability measured, the difference is considered as an intangible asset. If the fair value goes up, it's an asset, right? So that asset will be recognized as an intangible asset. Again, if you see this standard being a temporary standard, it says that you are permitted to separate and show the fair value of your acquired contracts into an intangible asset and the other items, whatever you are taking as an insurance contract, but it is not mandatory. That means I need not split. I can simply do a measurement of the fair value of the entire insurance liability and the entire insurance asset without even going for split accounting if it is acquired as part of the business combination. So in this standard, what you are getting in this is that in case if you have identified and split accounted, that insurance contract will be part of my Ind AS 104, and intangible asset will be accounted again as per Ind AS 104, and it will be excluded from the scope of two standards. One is Ind AS 38 relating to intangible assets, and another thing is Ind AS 36. So even that intangibles relating to insurance contract will also be accounted here. That is the reason why it says you are permitted but need not split the insurance contract and any intangibles which is coming in, because your accounting policy is different and the value of the contractual right, fair value of the contractual right is different. Okay. You may ask, sir, what is this in this standard? It says you can continue to use your existing policy. In certain cases, it permits to change. In certain cases, it says you cannot permit. That means, what is the meaning of insurance contract? In simple terms, insurance companies, till such time Ind AS 117 comes in, you will follow the existing accounting policy as per existing GAAP, whatever they are following now. Only for the specific areas there is a guidance where it is mandatorily says that you have to follow only this, you have to follow. When there is an option available at the discretion of the insurance company, they can decide to account as per insurance contracts 104 standard, or otherwise we can continue the existing practice. In simple terms, that is what I wanted to say, being a transitory or temporary standard. So now we have seen that what is an insurance contract, what is the insurance risk, what could be the discretionary benefits which has been added, how to split account that, and when you can change your accounting policy. Do you have an exemption from paragraph 10 to 12 of Ind AS 8? We have seen that. We have also seen that in case if there are some reinsurance contract, how it has to be done, and what is the liability adequacy test, and what is the resulting impact which you have to consider when you can actually change your accounting policy, and when you can actually account for a shadow accounting. All those things we have seen, right? The measurement, accounting, recognition principles, key definitions, all those things we have seen. What is left out is major disclosure. What it says is that information that helps the users understand the amounts in the financial statement that arising from the insurance contract. For example, what is the accounting policy relating to insurance contract, related assets, related liability, when you recognize income, when you recognize the related expenses, those accounting policies should be disclosed. What is the assets recognized, liability recognized, income recognized, in expenses recognized? What is the cash flows arising from the insurance contract? Cash flow in the sense, it need not necessarily be an insurance, so income. It may be insurance premium, which will also be collected, and a portion may be income, portion may be for the purposes of meeting your future claim. If the insurance is a cedent, what is cedent or cedent, whatever way in which you pronounce, is nothing but I have taken a reinsurance contract. That is what. I'm an insurer, but I took a reinsurance contract to reduce my insurance risk. Additional disclosures are required. And what are all the assumptions? Again, if you see that how you have taken certain assumptions to measure the assets, liabilities, income, expenditure, etc., and what is the quantified disclosure? What is the effect of changes? Sensitivity analysis. What is the effect of changes of the assumptions? And how the changes in insurance liabilities, reinsurance assets, etc. is happening, along with any deferred acquisition cost. For example, when I'm taking a premium, insurance contract, I'm paying an agency commission, but the agency commission is for serving the entire contract period, means it's also acquisition cost, which has to be deferred over the policy period, right? Tenure of the contract. So accordingly, what is the opening balance? What is the closing balance? What is the changes which has happened during the period? You have to show the reconciliation for insurance liability, reinsurance contract, and the deferred acquisition contract. To assess the nature and extent of the risk involved in the insurance contract, what is the risk management objectives and policy? How it is being managed by the entity to ensure that the risk is managed properly and there is no major outflows which is not anticipated, which comes as a surprise because your management is not proper. What is the objectives and policies? What is the terms and conditions which may That is the sensitivity analysis is what specifically is coming in. Terms and conditions of certain insurance contract which may have a material effect on the amount, timing and uncertainty of the future cash flows. That's what we have said as an insurance risk, right? So what is the insurance risk, and what are all the terms and conditions of the contract, insurance contract, which may have a material effect on the insurance risk? That is exactly is what is expected to be disclosed. Apart from that, the insurance risk, both before after the risk mitigation by reinsurance, should be given. Sensitivity of the insurance risk, concentration of insurance risk, for example, what is a group, what type of customers, what type of exposure, for example, flood or fire or one particular industry, so whether loss of profits, so how the concentration of risk is being there, and actual claims which has been made during the period and settled compared to what is the estimate which they have made, and based on which any true up has been made for the liability, which has to be a liability adequacy test, whether it is factored for liability adequacy test. That should also help the user to understand that. The credit risk, liquidity risk, market risk, uh, as per Ind AS 107, we will see that Ind AS 107 separately would also require if the insurance contract are within the scope of Ind AS 107. We will see that when we are discussing Ind AS 107. In fact, what I am planning was I will cover Ind AS 109 financial instruments, then I will come to disclosure, because we should know the accounting principle. Ind AS 32 alone we have seen what is the definition, and what is the split between equity and liability. That's alone we have seen. Now the measurement, recognition, derecognition, etc. we will see as per Ind AS 109. After that, when we are going to Ind AS 107, it will be helpful. So in this case, I'm making two changes. If you have seen Ind AS 101, I said I will consider as the last standard. 107 I will consider only after 109. This is two changes which I am making beyond my the sequence of the standard wise whatever I am covering. Market related risk, if there is a embedded derivatives which is there, that is also part of 109. We will have it. We will have a discussion on that. So that is the end of this standard. As I have said earlier, it's a temporary standard. That's the reason why it is not talking about what is the principle for recognition and measurement of assets and liabilities. What is the recognition and measurement relating to income and expenditure? What are all the other things which has to be done at every reporting period? It is giving only a general guidance. You can follow the existing accounting principle till such time full-fledged standard comes in, but during that interim period follow the principles which has been specifically given in this as a mandatory one, and in case if there are some exemptions given, on your discretion decide to follow or not to follow. Okay, it's a temporary standard. That's the reason why all these things have been discussed. With that, I will conclude this session on Ind AS 104, and we will see Ind AS 105 in the immediate next session. It is non-current asset held for sale and discontinued operation. Another interesting standard. Lot of questions will be arising out of Ind AS 105. We will discuss about that. Till such time we are coming back with another standard, I take leave of you, and stay home and stay safe with you, with your family. And any questions, you can post it in our channel itself. And whenever your friends are asking for any link, ask them to be part of our subscriber list, so that they will not be under the mercy of receiving the link at each and every point of time, and spread the message so that everyone will get the benefit. Thank you so much for your patient hearing, and also good inputs which you are sending me. Some of you have also observed certain small errors which was there, which I have acknowledged. You can go through that and continue to give your critical comment on this, so that I will be able to do it. Okay. With that, I take leave. Thank you so much. Bye.